Thank you for joining us. Are we in focus? We feel
Yeah.
out of focus. No, I feel. No, let me start over.
Is the
No,
mind focused?
is the
I
mind
don't think
focused?
so.
But this we wanted to do a series of talks on topics that are very, very relevant to yoga and yoga practitioners, but that are not simply, oh, well, let's study the Yoga Sutra and sort of try to understand these particular sutras and then keep them out of context of our daily lives. Because really, truly, why we practice in many ways is in order to be able to navigate in this world. And one thing that can happen within a yoga practice is that the yoga practice itself becomes a way of avoiding the actual world, avoiding the relationships that need tending, or avoiding some of the topics and difficulties that are going on in the world by sort of isolating ourselves. And this happens, all the time. It's a natural reflex sometimes for people to want to avoid life. And yoga can become a means of avoidance rather than a means of diving in. And so,
Yeah, a means of escape.
yeah,
Has many different ways that yoga can become avoidance, or often religion in general can become avoidance,
and
particularly of the most difficult things.
And when we allow that to happen within our own practice, it becomes a real shame because we miss the kind of juiciest part of the practice. And any of you who've had injuries, physical injuries, or deaths that you have encountered while you've been, at the same time in your life that you've been practicing, you realize how much the practice can really help us through things. And so we thought carefully about some of the topics that we'd like to broach. And this one in particular that we have got this evening, and we're thinking that we're going to do a follow-up one we'll tell you about at the end of this. But it is looking at the state of affairs in the world today, where there is extraordinary separation going on, where people are separatists, where people are not communicating, where there is a huge amount of hatred that's being sort of perpetuated. There's also the counterbalance to that, but what the media and what we are witnessing in many places is a resurgence of some of these things. And in particular in the United States, we are faced with the sort of peeling away of layers of denial that our country has been a country founded on racism. And this topic is particularly important to Richard and me, having been youngsters, children during the 1950s and 1960s, when there was a sort of a movement when Martin Luther King was around, when there was a movement to try to get some human rights awareness in the United States, when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated and was around working for human rights before that. And for both of us, this topic in particular, racism, it really hits home. I grew up in the deep south of the United States, in Florida, and as a young child, I witnessed just extraordinary atrocities My parents were English, and so we also were sort of like the foreigners who were weird, and people sort of looked at us out of the sides of their eyes. But we had white skin, and so we could slip through the cracks. But I grew up with a mother who was a medical anthropologist, and I would play around at the hospital with her during the days, sometimes when she was working. And I remember there being a bathroom that was a teeny weeny little bathroom that was on the door, it said colored. And right next to it was this huge big bathroom that was for the whites. And I also, there was a colored and a white water fountain. And I would make it a point to go into, the non-white bathroom, just because it seems so ludicrous to have the two right there, right next to each other. But then also, so that was kind of a minor underlying thing in a public building in my lifetime. But then also families like mine who were more pro-integration had extreme anger played out against them. We had friends who were very active in the integration movement, who were white-skinned, who had crosses burned in their yard by the Ku Klux Klan. And, as a person of, the sort of white background, there's this strange element where you want to do what you can do to help, and you do what you can do to help. But then also there is this powerful element of hatred and of violence that you sometimes witness. And so it's troubled me, and my whole life I ended up going to the all-black university for a period of time on an exchange program. And so I was one of 14 white students on a campus of 26,000 black students. And really that was when I started seeing, gosh, even though my family is we're this progressive family, we really, and myself included, didn't really see the picture as fully as we should have and could have. And some of you may have read the article we wrote with CD about the, why we run, that was in our newsletter. And he mentioned one thing in that I thought was just so important for us to all remember, is that for those people, whether it's in the United States, who are facing racial prejudice, or in a country elsewhere in the world, for those of us who really care about them and do things for them, it's wonderful. And yet, we can step outside of it. We can go home and feel safe. Whereas if this is cultural or, or national anger turned towards you, you can't step outside of it ever. And so as yoga people, it's really important to look closely at what we can do to be, a support, but not, not impose our ideas and ideals on a situation we may not fully comprehend. Because it is almost impossible to understand hatred or racism or the caste system if you are not a victim of it.
Yeah. As in, like, why we run, like, when I can imitate, anyone, I can be exclusive, and then when the police stop me, they don't know, and so they're a little bit, we won't bother this man.
Yeah.
But then, friends of ours who are black or Latino or something, when the police stop them, they could be killed, just for, doing something funny. And so it's like this is like a time for me to like wake up to actually what's going on, to wake up to history. And I grew up in a different situation in a place called University City, right next to Washington University, in just outside of St. Louis, and so right next to the university, we had mostly academics around us, but probably the majority in our neighborhood were people who were Holocaust survivors. And so many Jews had moved or had escaped before or after World War II. And so a lot of my friends, were very much aware of the actual history of what had happened in World War II with, that. And so I grew up extremely aware of, the history of the Holocaust and the persecution of Jews, though I was also an outsider. But at the same time, the greater environment in St. Louis was one of, it was a place where the northern sections, had belonged to the North, the Union, but south of there, it had fallen to the Confederates, and it was quite shocking. When I went off to college in '68, my roommate was black and a very wonderful man, and it was almost like, wow, I'm being awakened to the level of fear and persecution, and so for me now, when I look back and discover, the actual history of the United, I was a little bit naive in terms of, the history of the I knew about it, but it wasn't forefront in my mind.
And we're giving you a little bit of this background because, we're older than most of you probably, I'm almost 70, Richard is 70, soon to be 71. And in our short lifetimes, there have been these bursts of change that have started to happen. And then it just sort of plateaus. Kind of reminds me of a yoga practice where you have these bursts of progress and then things sort of bottom out or just stabilize. And unless you energize it, then you're kind of never going to continue to grow in a direction that's important. And we thought at this juncture in time it would be good to do this, to bring this out to yoga people, because a year ago, at the end of this month, I think May 25th, is when George Floyd was murdered. And we've just gone through a thing where, wonderful, in some ways, his killer was convicted. But it is a time at this point where, rather than saying, oh, good, that's taken care of, to say, this is a beginning again. Right. And we cannot wait another 60 years, 50 years for the for justice and for human rights to be something that is in the forefront of the minds of people.
Right, there's this huge wave of opposition from the controlling racist establishment, and and it's a propaganda war, and so right now is the time to really. Otherwise, it's going to be washed under the rug again.
Yeah. And in terms of yoga, I mean, it makes complete sense that this is what we practice for, what we stand for, and what are the ethics that we learn about in yoga. These things should not be, and yet the caste system exists within our wonderful country of India. So it's not like we invented the caste system or racism in the United States, although we did our own version. And so, as practitioners, we're in a kind of unique position, I think, where we have the opportunity to really pause and look at what these teachings that we are so interested in have to say about things like racism, hatred, separatism. And before we started doing this talk, we were thinking about, well, why do people tend to become racist? Or
yeah.
why do we hate each other? Why do we become separate?
And so, sure.
One.
The Clichs?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you look at the Yoga Sutra, where they're describing Kriya Yoga, which is really simple. It's tapas vadvaya ishvara pranidana, and which is tapas means to focus and literally to burn, and then after you burn for a while, which I think is the stage we're just starting, then you start to shine. So tapas is shining, and so dvaya is literally means to meditate on sva, or that which is the actual self, often interpreted in the Orthodox world as chanting the Vedas, although the Bhagavad Gita might say, well, there's more to it than that. And then Ishvara Pranidada means to not surrender, but to offer everything to, as a gift, the beloved. Ish is the desired beloved deity who is in the heart. And then what this does is it makes the kleshas go away, or it makes the kleshas thin. They're still there, but they become thin, and then you can actually start the yoga practice of working with them. And so, let's see, what are those? Oh, the first klesha is avidya, and avidya means ignorance, and that's when you confuse that which is impermanent, which happens with everything you're experiencing, with what is permanent, which is quite a slippery and mysterious thing, or that which is joyous with that which is essentially a mess and non-joyous. And so they say it's the confusion of nama and rupa, or the actual thing, which is very wonderful in its arising in the present moment in the form of your direct experience, with whatever formula you make for it, the name of it. And that's the basic problem, is as soon as something happens, you say, oh, that's a bird, or oh, that's, and you see another being and you label them instantly, which is for survival sometimes good, like, oh, that's a lion. And so then you take the normal precautionary route, or that's a bus, and so you don't step in front of it. And so,
But then you also sometimes say, well, that's a person I don't know that I put in this category.
Yeah.
And that's one of the, so it's a natural tendency to do this, and it's also the primary root of suffering, that others grow from. And so when you look at hatred, when you look at racism, when you look at separatism, it is this aspect of avidya that really starts to fuel these kinds of mind states.
Yeah, because it starts the story which you can actually feel the prana pattern for. It's not it's a funny feeling. And then you get asmita, which means just the principle of I am, and or egotism. And this is natural for any organism, because you can't have a surviving organism without a shell. And so then the story begins. And as soon as you have the principle of ego, then you get, raga, which is often which you make an object out of it. And then if you think about the object, many objects are pretty neutral, but the ones that stick are the ones that you go, oh, I want that, which might mean just safety, or it might mean I want money, or I want power, or I want domination, or I want to be right. And it can take endless numbers of forms. And so raga, and then from that immediately, the flip side in the mind is hatred or repulsion, dvesha, wanting to get rid of it. And so raga and dvesha.
And we may have said this in a couple of the other lectures, but to me it's really powerful to think about. I actually do think I said this last time, but sometimes I'll ask Richard, what do you want for dinner? Or would you like,
you can tell him the truth.
To kind of have
the whole story.
Have me go get you a cup of coffee and a croissant or something like that. And he's been like just zoning out or doing his work or doing yoga or whatever. And as soon as I say that and interrupt his mind, there's this seed that's planted.
Yeah.
And
I have to think about the sacred coffee drink or the croissant for about 2 or 3 minutes, because I could always say, now let's not do it. And then, and after that bit, I want it.
And the same...
And I've adjusted my whole story of the day, that I'm actually doing it because Mary loves to go out to our coffee place.
And the opposite happens with hatred for many situations where, so let me just do that, where so that the point being, if you really focus on something for a while, then it becomes real, and then it becomes you want it or you don't want it,
or at least you think it's real, because you could be focusing on a conspiracy theory or something completely absurd, or a misperception and hallucination. Yeah. And you become extremely attached to it or repulsed by it. And you can go absolutely with, these, raga and dvesha are 2 of the gates of hell. And you can create that out of just misperception.
And the part that's real is your belief that they are real. And so a tact to check oneself when you feel these drives, and this is very applicable to racist tendencies or to hatred if it arises, is to step back and have svadvaya or self-examination, to really look closely at what is actually going on, what is actually, happening, and to look again, which is, one of the things we learn in so many texts, is to look again. Because as soon as you start thinking, oh, well, I have to do all this work to prevent hatred from being in the world, and I hate those people who are making hatred, it starts to be this thing where you have created a story again.
And you're creating a story that might make hatred, even though your story is that you hate hatred. And there's a lot of yogic practices can fall into that, and a lot of religious practices can and do fall into that kind of absurd mess. And so that's the svadvaya, is to look, and in the context of yoga, because we're watching prana, because we know that prana or sensation and just how you experience the body, and then you make theories about the body. You get, oh, I need a story. Oh, this is a miserable body, or a poor me, or a great me, or whatever. You make that story, and you're no longer really feeling what's going on. And so the whole thing is to look in. This is the Svadvaya, and they say that the Ishvara which is the beloved, which could be the Buddha, it could be a teacher, or just someone who's, respected that way. They're famous for their being in love with all beings, and not just human beings, but cats and dogs and birds and whales and trees and Mother Nature, and then all beings, even evil beings who are, and so the practice of yoga becomes this quest of how can I locate all beings in my heart, and so this is, and you're all familiar with the Brahma Viharas, which we're going to talk about later. But there's in Hatha Yoga, there's the representation in the heart of what are called the Shatripus, which are the 6 enemies, and this is probably the most difficult part of yoga practice for any of us, whether we are, no matter what our situation is, or whether we are privileged, or whether we are, dying, or anything. And so the shat, or kama, krodha, lobha, lust, anger, and greed, and they form a triangle in the heart. And then there's considered to be a reflected triangle, because the heart is, in some approaches of yoga, considered to be where you really connect with everything else. So this is really earth, just like your sitting bones, when you get your feet on the floor, your pelvic floor, that's earth, because we share it. And then it turns out that we share everything in the heart too. And so then the Star of David, where you have another triangle, which is composed of moha, which means delusion, which is again the misunderstanding. It's like avidya. I am deluded, and so I'm basically almost hallucinating my experience, or I so believe in the stories my mind makes, they're practically hallucinations. And then madha just means me, 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 me. And a lot of our worry throughout the day is me, 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 or I, me, and mine. And it's just like a self concern. And then the final one is called matsarya, which means envy of others. So it means everything flows to me. So it's a word for not only jealousy, but it's a word for self-love or self-infatuation or narcissism, as a lot of crazy politicians that we have trouble finding in our hearts are these extreme narcissists. Mm-hmm. They're just, I'm doing this because it makes me powerful. I'm doing this because, and they don't care about others at all. But it turns out that we have that same quality in the heart. So if you throw even those beings out of your heart, you're splitting your own self and you're closing your own heart. So we work on that, and we discover that this is in Hatha Yoga, which is central channel middle path yoga, that this is the key to opening up, is you have to find all beings, and unfortunately the beings it's easy with the ones you like. There are a few nice ones out there. But you got to find and eventually you'll find the beloved who holds them all.
Yeah, and so in terms of applying that to social issues or to cultural and culturally structural issues like cultural or structural racism that's part of this country, and it's not only the United States. It's historically happened many times throughout history all over the world. And if you take that and you recognize that on a certain level, a culture or a nation is very much like a sort of macrocosm of one's own self, or oneself is a microcosm of a culture within which we live. And so this same sort of enemies around the heart of a culture start to create things like structural racism, or allow the perpetuation of hatred towards one another because of this sort of greed, and because of the human nature tendency to have those enemies around the heart. So do cultures. And so we find ourselves in a time in history where an understanding of that that structure within ourselves, of the idea that the kleshas, that the kleshas cause the suffering, but that we also have the potential to have these enemies around our hearts if we are complacent, or if we allow the mind to create storylines that we get carried away with ourselves, or if the complacency turns towards the cultural norms, or towards things we see that are against our ethical or moral standards, and we don't do anything about them. So it's really important to not think, oh, well, as sometimes when we do yoga and we feel so blissed out, we think, oh no, I don't have these things. But we all have the potential for these things, just as the cultures within which we live, just as the global culture has the potential for these things. But potential is not the same thing as acting them out. It's just like when we have anger or fear or jealousy that might drive something like a sense of hatred or racism to arise within us. Those emotions can arise, but then through the yoga, there are possibilities for transformation over and over and over again. And we may make mistakes, and we may go off for a while, on a tangent of wanting this or hating that. And then we catch ourselves and we see it. And it's at that juncture where it is imperative to really be honest and take action that is of service to ourselves and to the bigger picture.
Yeah. So how? It's like if I don't like demons, and what I'm doing is hating demons, and so that's actually my inner demon that's hating demons. If I hate racism because it causes suffering, but if I don't understand it, then my inner, it's all these things that I am not because of my egotism. And so a lot of the challenge of yoga is to see the deep mind. So, and one is, of course, yoga teaches you're not your mind anyway. All of that is just impermanent Shakti, and it's essentially divine. But throughout ignorance, you're identifying with a piece of it, and that creates instantly this shadow, and that shadow binds you to your karma. It binds you to people think it's my destiny. I was born this way, it's my destiny. And you're cut off from the creative power of that. And so, yeah, it's a pretty challenging thing to do. And how do you do it? Like, rather than saying, well, it's all good when you practice yoga, is that if you're actually recognizing other beings and you're recognizing this enemies around your heart, what you naturally do, and is at times that seem appropriate, you communicate with others. At other times you start to act in the world. So you're able then to act in a creative way once you start to own this. And so one of the actions is to keep learning, is to learn history, to learn your own history as best you can, and then to watch now I know history. And then you see your ego acting, and you let go of that, and you continue to learn, and you get these brief tastes of infinity or complete satisfaction without having to gain anything, without having to be better than others, without having to have people acknowledge you as anything. You get that taste or that sense of satisfaction.
And it's in that taste of satisfaction that you have the potential to tap into the core of your own heart, which is where, as Richard said, all other beings actually are, whether you let them in or not. All of us live in one another's hearts, even the ones we don't want in our hearts. We invite them in if we are more conscious, but in reality, we are so interconnected that state of being exists, that we are connected through the tenderness of heart. And it is in that space within ourselves when we start to really feel that and feel that connection, that sense of an ability to both welcome others into our awareness and in our hearts, but also in times of need to lean on others, to realize that, hey, if everybody is in the core of my heart, then I'm not alone. And if I need others, then I have a source to turn to. And so really, truly, the practice becomes to tune in an embodied sense to this real visceral feeling of interconnectedness. And from that place, as Richard was saying, to ask questions, to learn, to, in the case of something like racial injustice, if, from whichever side we are coming, it is imperative to listen. That is a huge part of the communication that takes place, rather than say, oh, well, here's the solution. But to listen and have dialogue and have that coming from that place of the other.
Yeah, and you might not have a single solution, and you might not ultimately know, but you're willing to experiment and then find out if it worked, and it might not work. And so this is the new thing, the potential with the internet and all of this is good communication, and balanced, of course, by the potential of being manipulated by artificial intelligence.
Yeah. So we wanted to just kind of open up some of that as sort of food for thought over the next short while, and to also look at there are a couple of books that people have recommended to us that we've read that we think are very relevant to these topics. And one of them, many of you have probably read, is the book called Caste, which is written by
What do you have?
Isabel Wilkinson, and it is a brilliant book that's become a bestseller these days, and it really looks at how castes have been part of history throughout the world, and then particularly at the Nazi situation, at the United States situation, where racism has, in a way, been defined as looking at people of color, but that it has created a caste system. And then also looking at our beloved India, like how caste system in that country has been this
A system of slavery,
Yeah.
where you don't need chains, so it's very painful. And
And in many ways, something like a caste system or racism, part of what we are facing in this day and age, and I was just teaching as part of a large workshop this weekend on death and dying, and one of the things that was brought up in that workshop is that there's a new psychological term that's out there, which is that in this particular time in history, there is a cascading series of traumas that we are facing as a global community, meaning the economic problem as a very minor one, the ecological problem as a very major one, the hatred and racism and awareness of that, which is good, but the existence of caste systems and those things as a very big trauma that we are all facing. And then in particular, the pandemic and the changes in our lives that have transpired because of that. So because of this time in history, it's kind of overwhelming, but it also is a time where it is becoming increasingly clear that we must take action, and there is still time to take action, and the way to take action is to first get grounded oneself, and then to do what one can to heal trauma that one has experienced oneself, or to help others in so doing, and then to take action that will make substantive change. And the other book that I wanted to recommend is called My Grandmother's Hands by, what's his name? Resma Makim. And it's, again, a very big, popular book, but it's an interesting look at the trauma of racism. And the thing that I loved about the book is that he really looks at it as one of the biggest solutions that we can come up with in terms of healing trauma is to become embodied. And he looks very closely at the idea of belly breathing and the vagus nerve, which in a very beautiful way he calls the soul nerve.
The soul nerve.
It's a very sweet way of looking at it. And so to me, that these kinds of books like Caste or like My Grandmother's Hands, and the idea that the soul nerve is crossing over into neuroscience and in sort of center focus on neuroscience and Buddhism and yoga and classrooms in schools, that this is a time where there is this potential for change, and the potential for embodiment as a means of change. If we can step out of our things, the elements that are the clichs that keep us not changing. If we can step out of our ego, if we can dissolve those enemies around the heart. So,
Yeah.
did you want to say anything more about the caste system in India?
Oh, that's a whole
Or we leave
topic.
that for next one?
We should basically,
Yeah.
as you know, the word for caste is varna, which means color, and so, and it's not that the fact that society breaks itself into specialized skills, but that this is inherited in different racial groups. That is the problem, and I think that a lot of the movements in India historically, which are non-Vedic, and even the Vedic ones of the early Upanishads are almost looking at the problem with misinterpreting what is meant by caste, and so that it becomes solely something you inherit from your family. So you're stuck there, and so a lot of the systems, and particularly yoga systems, are designed to help break down these rigid walls between people.
As did the Buddha.
As did the Buddha, very directly. That's a big one.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that.
So it's, we just sort of opened up a can of worms tonight for you, but we also really feel that through these practices, we have the tools we need to listen deeply from the heart to others, and to keep the movements alive that are really changing the world, so that hatred isn't something that is so front and center in so many parts of the world, so that greed, those who want to continue being greedy can do so, but that there could be a huge movement of people who offer generosity, because the more people who really start looking closely and deeply at themselves and at the connection of all of us to one another, things like greed don't make sense anymore. Like generosity is what makes you feel better rather than greed. And so we're at this juncture where we may have these cascading series of traumas that we're facing, but we're also in a world where more and more and more people are waking up to the fact, the truth of impermanence and the truth of interconnectedness, and the truth that if we work together, we solve these things, and that if we work separately, we don't. And so on one hand, it could be, oh my God, I don't want to think about it. Let me just do yoga and bliss out. But on another hand, it's this time of great opportunity.
Yeah. So should we do the...
Yeah.
So I was thinking we could do the closing chant, but there's some interesting things in it. And I'll chant it once, and then I'll give my brief commentary. And this is a chant, actually, it's not from the Rig Veda. It was a stone engraving from the 14th century that was found in the northern Karnataka state area. And it was two brothers founded a kingdom then, and they had been off studying. And it was quite inspired. And so this is kind of their collection of all the wisdom that they had received from their travels up north. And so the chant, as you know, it starts, Swasti prajabhya paripalayantam, which means swasti is good flow, prajabhya is to any being that's ja, who is manifesting or is born, and may paripalayantam, all over the place. So any being, anywhere, it doesn't even have to be in this universe, there are many of them, may they be swasti, which means good flow. Nayena margena mahim mahesha, and may those who are the great knowers, the great seers, may they flourish. And then here's the line that's very interesting. Go brahmanebhya shubham astu nityam. So go literally means a cow, and Brahmins are, the highest caste. Wait a minute, what have I just said? But the definition of a Brahmin is someone, an actual Brahmin, is someone who sees all beings equally. And so there are a few of those around. Okay, just because one, gets the costume and all of that, it doesn't mean they're an actual Brahmin in the original sense of the word. And go, cow, we think, well, that's very, we like cows there. But go actually means language. Cow means, and so language is the Shakti, the divine creative power of language. And language, of course, is where you have a nama, you have a name for things. So it's what creates time and space. And so may these things flourish, and may the proper use of language, which is the dovetailing of the whole principle of the Clichs, of avidya, misperception, or nama rupa, confusion, story making, time and space, that's what creates everything. And so may it be good. And then the last line, loka samasta sukhino bhavantu, which is terribly Buddhist sounding, isn't it? May all of these worlds, everywhere, be happy. May all these beings, so lokas are all the worlds and beings. And then, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. And so this again brings it back under the coverage of being, this is Vedic. And so this is a tradition in India, is we, both Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, and all the other many, many different traditions, they love to that's exactly what we said. And so they embrace it and own it. And so the three Shantis get rid of the three types of klesha. Shall we chant it? Okay. Om Swasti Prajabhya Paripalayantam Nayena Margena Mahim Mahesha Go Brahmanebhya Shubham Astu Nityam Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
So a little bit of a start thinking about some of these things. Please look deeply at these issues, and together let's make things change.
Let's learn.
We can
Study. Do it.
Yeah. So.
At least try.
Yeah. Every little bit counts. Thank you. So what we will do is we'll turn off the recording, and if anybody has questions, we'll stick around afterwards and answer, and we'll post the topic for next time. And we hope you join us next time as well. So thank you. We'll see you soon. Be well.